Hello everyone. Uh, Good evening, dear community. You're part of Berlin's webinar, as always, every week. Berlin, a community for learning professionals in Berlin. And today we have a wonderful speaker, Alexander Kosma, who agreed to be with you tonight on this beautiful sunny day. We're just talking about how those people are so committed to know more about the EdTech community, about EdTech future, and sacrificing this beautiful Berlin day. So thank you, Alexander, once again for being with us. My name is Ola Jongerius. I'm a founder of Berlin. As I have just mentioned, is a network. It's a community of learning professionals, anyone who is passionate about education, instructional designers, teachers, trainers, facilitators, university fellows, HR, anyone who's curious how to innovate, how to make education and corporate learning and development much more impactful and measurable. So welcome. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and lots of new faces. I will just introduce a little bit of Berlin to you, what we do and what our goal is. So you're here with us for this particular event. In case you're lost and just press the random Zoom link, because it did happen before. So that's us. You can find our community on our newly established website, which I'm really proud of. And lots of people here today also have supported us with this event and with this website. So if you want to subscribe to our future events, you're more than welcome. And thank you to those who donated. Really appreciate it, because that's what keeps the community going. So I guess that's enough about the community. You're here to learn more about EdTech. You're here because you're passionate about EdTech. And that's exactly the reason why we're here today. So before we go into that, I would like to ask you, who are you, where are you from, as in where are you currently located? Because we have a very interesting community, and sometimes we have people that join us from all over the world. So we're just curious, where are you? Just write in the chat where you are at the moment, and then we're gonna proceed. So just write in the chat where you currently are, just for us to know. Berlin, Berlin, Berlin. So mostly Berlin, but it means we have more of a community. Good, okay, we have a bit of people from outside of Berlin. Okay, brilliant. Very nice. So you all, just a bit of a structure, how it's going to happen, what kind of event you're going to have. It's going to be a moderated fireside chat. There's not going to be a webinar of you being a passive observer. Oh, we have someone from Florida. Nice, good to have you here. Thanks for joining. So it's going to be moderated discussion with Alexandra, where you also can be active participants. And by active participant, I mean that you can ask questions. You're going to be on mute just for logistic reasons, but you can ask all your questions not in the chat, but in the Slido. So slido.com, and you follow the hashtag Berlin. And all those questions are going to be asked. And Alexandra and myself are going to have a nice chat, answering your questions and having a bit of a engaged discussion. All right, sounds good? Brilliant. So Alexandra, once again, excited to see you here. I haven't seen you in person for a while, so hopefully with this whole pandemic.
I haven't seen anyone in person for a while.
What you been busy with? You're a very busy lady, and I know you're doing crazy things, and anything related to education and EdTech. There is Alexandra, that she's the person of Germany, not only of Berlin, but of Germany when it comes to EdTech. So who are you? What do you do?
Lovely to meet you. I'm Alexandra. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at both EDU and Condena. As some background, Condena is a technology provider in collaborative online learning, and we've been around for a long time. Basically, we were the ones who pioneered collaborative MOOCs back in the day, when MOOCs were very focused on one-directional discussion. And for those of you who are not used to our EdTech acronyms, MOOC, our favorite one, stands for Massive Open Online Courses. Since then, we've established EDU, the first digital native academic institution in Europe. And this is a completely new model for education because it's actually completely digital from the ground up. And we've reinvented the traditional university to allow for this. The subject area we decided to start with is by no means a simple one. So basically human medicine, and we launched a bachelor's and master's in human medicine, combining online learning in a digital space with practical rotations in teaching hospitals that can be placed anywhere in the world. So I work in a mix of academic education, EdTech, and even vocational training programs that are on our side. And yeah, we've done quite a bit even in the academic institution outside of medicine, but I won't bore you with all of these. And it's definitely been an interesting time in the last couple of months. A lot of things have changed. Operationally for us, not so much, because we were operating digitally to begin with. But I think in perception, very much so, because all of a sudden this has become the status quo.
Absolutely. Super impressive what you're doing, Alexandra. And I know that you do a lot of fundraising. You do everything that has to do with investment, and I'm not going to ask you what you do exactly when it comes to investment for your own company, but what is the current situation when it comes to investment, when it comes to EdTech startups? Because for those who are just a little bit, outside of Berlin, outside of Germany, I'm not sure where situation is in different countries, but Berlin doesn't seem to be the spot when it comes to EdTech. It's usually blockchain, it comes to fintech, medtech, but EdTech, it seems to be a little bit, let's say, not a priority. Will it change? What do you think? Like, how has this situation with coronavirus impacted education, in your opinion?
It impacted it in different ways. I mean, you're right, Berlin has not been a hotspot. It was, let's say, education, EdTech was a sexy topic for funding in 2016 or so back here. And this was also the time where everyone saw the promise of Coursera and they got a lot of funding. But as things went by, they didn't really find a business model, and this impacted a lot of the EdTech funding scene, even for us in Germany and Berlin. And we didn't have that many specialized education investors. We still don't have very many specialized education investors, but things are starting to come around now. And we definitely see a lot of renewed interest with the current pandemic, and especially in the area of digital. So I see some of the funding, let's say, dedicated to traditional education now migrating in this area, which is actually very helpful for education related founders, because in this area it's difficult to have conversations with investors because they don't know how your market works and they don't really understand the metrics in EdTech and education in general.
And when you're saying that there is a bit of movement happening in education sector, do you mean it's more about education as in tertiary education, primary, or would it be more for corporate education, corporate learning? Where is more of a interest coming through?
It's definitely happening on all levels. And they're reacting differently depending on where they are and the incentive structures. even on the European political level, so to say, there is a very strong push towards digitizing different types of training. And it's becoming clear that there is a widening skill gap in quite a lot of areas, and this requires scalable solutions. So corporate education as well is massively affected, while there is as well pressure on the academic side now to innovate and not just switch to online learning in the short term as they've done, but actually invest in developing the skills in teachers and that they understand how to adapt their pedagogical approaches to the new space. So there will be a lot of room. There is already quite some room for those who are skilled at selling in these markets, which are also tricky and right now completely underwater. But it seems like it will be a lot more sustainable.
To me, to the person who is working in the topic of diversity inclusion, I see a bit of a trend, especially looking at some European grants and German grants, Erasmus Plus, for example. There seem to be a lot of interest in having the inclusive education, whether it comes to upskilling employees or whether it comes to having neurodiversity and having more of a personalized approach. So kind of education for all, regardless of where you come from, what kind of your learning styles are, what kind of background you come from, especially in Berlin, for example, there are lots of education for newcomers, you know, for some basic skills that are very basics for Europeans. For newcomers, it's completely different. So you have digital education, as well as language education, so on and so forth. So to me, it seems also, you know, for maybe I'm a little bit biased, a person who's really passionate about having this inclusion. It seems like education, what you mentioned as well, like echoing in a way, for teachers, for educators to also learn how to adapt your teaching style towards learners and not just kind of one size fits all.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting and tricky thing, because as you transition online, for the learners who have not been used to this environment, they also need the skills to do this. And they need intrinsic motivation, and they need to know how to be self-directed and actually manage their own learning. And this is something that it's hard to approach in different cultures. It's not taught at all. And now on a planetary level, we're witnessing the effects of that.
Yeah, the good and bad of globalization, you know, there's no one size fits all. At the same time, the way we learn, it has to be adaptive. We actually have quite a few questions. It's very, very nice. Thank you, the audience, very engaged, love it. The first question is, how do you communicate to customers, either B2C or B2B, that continuous learning is a must-have for an organization and not only nice to have? Love this question. It's my life point.
Yeah, B2B is slightly different from B2C. I think slowly companies are coming around. There is definitely a lot of data. The World Economic Forum has published so much on the increasing skill gaps. And it's something that is very well known in political circles, but unfortunately, it's still problematic if you have to convince your client that this is worth investing in. And they do see the numbers, especially in needing recruitment and having to train people on a continuous basis, but it's still a very difficult discussion to have. But sticking to the facts and communicating as much as possible around the increasing need and around how your product actually addresses that need is very helpful. Same is the situation in the B2C, where sometimes what the learner wants and what is good for the learner are relatively different things. And again, it's extremely important to be very outcomes oriented in the benefits that they will actually have from it. But you have a much shorter moment in time to actually engage them on this.
It probably all goes back into how do you measure the impact? Yeah, so a lot of people still see learning and even like L&D departments as the department that kind of spends the money and doesn't bring any value, you know. But how do you actually measure the impact of education? And until you have this measurement and metrics in place, it's very difficult to prove that it actually benefits business in the long run or even in the short run.
I'm still hoping we move closer and closer to a learning outcomes-based approach, because there's still a lot of solutions where the primary KPIs are engagement or retention or acquisition, which of course are numbers that you need to have, but they're secondary to actually achieving the learning outcomes and having adequate models to measure this. And this is a differentiator in the end, because very few companies really report this transparently.
Okay. And is it a maybe German thing in the way that there's so few L&D departments in the, you know, it's not very common to have L&D department in average company, or is it more European compared to US, for example, where it's like more common to see?
Well, Europe is quite fragmented and there's different cultures quite a bit. And I think the US is much more outspoken in many ways, much better at selling themselves, and they understand employer branding a lot more. And to a certain extent, it comes with this.
Fair enough, fair enough.
I mean, there's this LinkedIn advertising that is following me everywhere, that argues the investment in L&D as employer branding exercise.
Okay.
But not intrinsically for the value it actually provides.
Well, it's definitely an interesting approach, whether you use it as a recruitment tactic or retention tactic or employee brand, employer brand, but yeah. Okay. So what currently solutions companies use to educate their employees? That's the next question. I guess that's a very wide question.
That's a very wide question, and I can only answer it partially. Not knowing everything, but there's basically two sides to look at. One is the corporates that actually are able to invest in their employees and are able to do this sustainably. And they do a lot from establishing academies and having very complex internal systems, to the small and medium enterprises who do basically what they can and piggy bank on different solutions that they buy in the market. Some of them are relatively standardized, like LinkedIn Learning or internal LMS systems where they buy courses. Others have a lot more freedom and buy different solutions and work a lot more with trainers than with these internal systems.
Do you think that will push more edtech startups startup founders to actually decide that there is a time to launch now, because everybody, especially in this pandemic, starts to learn? I mean, I don't exactly believe in that because I think in such situations of uncertainty, our brains are not really wired to suddenly accept new things. But what do you think about the current situation? Would it prompt more edtech startups to launch, or would it pose them?
It's been actually an interesting situation in the first couple of months, because many education technology companies were started offering their services for free during the period, which of course makes sense for them as an acquisition tactic, and as well out of the sheer feeling of wanting to help. But it did force all the smaller startups to actually have to offer their things for free, or they were rendered completely not competitive. And this has been, I mean, this is one of the discussions I've had with quite a few founders in the last month, that it's been a very difficult situation for them because they lost their revenue streams during this period. So it's a two-pronged approach. And the best way to look at it is not as a short-term opportunity, unless you have the runway to capture it as much as possible, but more as a sustainable opportunity to build business. And there's a lot of areas that will open now. Remote work and everything having to do with remote work is a big market that will evolve. And these are good areas to think about. Many of the traditional companies that were providing education solutions are not yet optimized for those environments. So it's a good time to come in, but more as a long-term strategy.
So if you're thinking of launching in March, so to say, or like in May, you probably had to wait a little bit till it's, or because you can't really compete against these big companies, no?
Exactly.
Or, yeah.
It's a good time to launch, but not a good time to make money.
Okay. It's a good way.
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing in education because sometimes your client and the buyer are quite different. Mm-hmm. And there are misaligned incentives, and the people who need the education are not always the ones who are able to pay for it. Okay. So it is tricky to begin with, and it's been even more difficult in this sense during this period.
That's quite interesting. You know, I spoke with someone working at Facebook recently, and he told me that, yeah, sure, we at Facebook, I mean, it was a couple of months ago, maybe it has changed. So take my words with a grain of salt. And he told me that, yes, we have acquired a lot of new users, a lot of Facebook members, community members, so to say, customers, but we don't generate much money because there's not so many people want to advertise. So I find it quite interesting. He said, like, well, I have a lot more work, but not so much generated money, not so much revenue. So I find it quite interesting, as in, like, there's your buyer who actually pays, and your user that uses it for free are not exactly the same people.
Exactly. Quite a few companies, education companies that are reliant on advertising took a big hit now, even though the user numbers went up like crazy because the advertising money just went down.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but it will stabilize in the next few months. So yeah, hopefully it's only a short-term thing, and we will all slowly adapt as a market to working in this reality.
What are the disadvantages of current solutions utilized by businesses? Where is EdTech growing into?
Where is EdTech growing into? That's a good question. And I think part of the disadvantages come, again, as my other point, with not having very good measures around the outcomes. In academic education, for example, we are very mindful of the results that the students have, but in corporate education, it's still possible to make a lot of buying decisions based on trends, based on buzzwords, and maybe the people who are actually setting these up don't have the knowledge and the expertise to understand whether a solution is effective versus it's enjoyable and fun. In an ideal world, you have both, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. And this is a very important factor.
Interesting. Do you think universities are going to become more digitalized in the long term, or once everything going to go back to normal, they were like, okay, let's forget it as the worst nightmare and go back to our old dinosaur, pre-dinosaur era like we did before?
Well, a lot of them will definitely try to do that, but others are already looking at long-term plans. And we do expect the pandemic to somehow stay with us for at least another year and a half. in isolated pockets, creating the need for remote learning and remote work. So even though we will have the situation under control, we will need better systems in place to respond when infections are kind of popping up in a certain area. I mean,
So,
even when we have vaccines, it will take a while.
So do you think that universities, like elite universities, are going to lose their status in university base because it doesn't really make sense anymore? You know, there was a case that I read in one state in US. Universities decided to students decided to sue university because they said, okay, I'm paying, I don't know, 20K a year for Zoom classes. And I'm paying for facilities, I'm paying for all those activities I'm not actually using. So do you think all this university will offline education, university education, be not as relevant anymore? Would it go back to, you know, Coursera, good courses and MOOCs and so on and so forth?
Academic education was already under a lot of pressure to innovate, and many of these universities, there were already a lot of complaints around the tuition versus the value it actually delivers. And what is very likely, I mean, all of these guys, the top 20 or so, are already looking at digital strategies. They are trying to be positioned on a global level, and they are looking at how they can expand their reach in a digital campus, so to say. What will be interesting is how the mid-tier go, because the mid-tier will definitely not be number one anymore if Stanford can take 30,000 people a year. I mean, why would you opt for a mid-tier university if you suddenly get into the top ones? So this would be interesting and how they approach it.
That's very interesting. Do you think maybe startups will need to look into solutions, how they can support universities and to optimize and to adapt to the new era of digitalization?
Definitely. And there is an entire class of companies called OPMs, online program managers, that are revolving to basically allow universities to scale and do this entire technology and operation side, sometimes marketing for them, because they don't have these skill sets. And many times it's very difficult for them to actually hire and develop these skill sets because they don't have the culture to operate this type of business.
Probably the same when we talk about schools. I know in several countries, it's quite interesting. Some countries that I know, they're actually Zoom classes, you know, for high school, for intermediate, even for primary school. In Germany, I know a couple of teachers who teach in intermediate school, and they say the best time ever now. You just need to send the homework. You need to come to school, but you need to work from school for a couple of hours, but you don't interact with students. So poor parents. If you're a parent in Germany, I'm really, really sorry. So yeah, teachers don't do so much work in Germany, so they probably will need to adapt somehow as well.
Yeah, a lot of the burden during this period has fallen on the students and on their parents primarily, depending on the age. And this has been quite tricky. Different countries actually did much more to support the parents. There's a lot of solutions in China, for example, where you scan your kids' mathematics homework and it automatically corrects it. And the parents.
I wish I had it in my school.
Yeah, it would have been so nice. But here it's still, I mean, different schools react in different ways, and many teachers do try to reach out, but they have limited options. They're overwhelmed themselves, so it's quite tricky.
I see there are lots of questions about trending edtech solutions right now and effective edtech solutions that you have seen in the market. So it's all about trends and the most effective ones. Anything that you've seen? Anything particularly interesting you've seen? You had a very interesting webinar yesterday as well, that's observing and learning from China and what they do.
There's a lot of interesting stuff happening around AI-driven learning. I don't know yet how far this is going to go. Culturally, it's much more accepted in some countries than in others. And there are ethical concerns in some areas, effectiveness concerns in others. But for very practical skills, it's actually fascinating what you can already achieve with AI. Language learning is a very interesting one in this sense because you can do very good pronunciation corrections and basic conversations using these type of technologies. Still not there for systems thinking, for example, and higher level cognitive skills, but on quite a few levels, it's very interesting at this point.
Would you please elaborate a little bit about ethical concerns? I mean, that's the whole probably pandemic situation about how the West reacts in terms of privacy and how the Asian countries, take a different approach. When it comes to education, would you elaborate a little bit more?
If we look at AI in particular, obviously there are some concerns around not understanding the algorithms themselves and them being a black box, which is one side of it. The other side of personalized learning and personalized instruction, where you look at it at scale, are questions about whether it may create certain disadvantages and generally not understanding the base of the content. We still don't have very good curated, quality assured content sets to understand what we recommend to students. And the sets that we do have work with such small user groups and restricted data that the recommendations themselves are not super good yet. And sorry, let me grab some tea. What's a little bit interesting here is if you look at how you want to optimize your algorithm, it becomes a bit complicated around what goals you do this around. So if we come back to outcomes-based education, it's very difficult actually to assess different types of skills. We know a lot about how to assess very simple things, but these assessment methods get less perfect as you go higher and higher. So mathematics would work very well, but social skills, things that are contextual in nature, things where I react to your input in a way that is correct and that is emotionally empathetic and appropriate to the situation. We still don't really know how to measure this, even in the best cases. So how can we collect enough information to do it like this?
Yeah, super interesting, especially it's a very cultural question. Yes, it's something, everybody has value. Everybody has respect as one of the values. Yeah, but the notion of respect, the interpretation of respect is very, very different. So, you could be respectful in one culture and another culture you'll be the most disrespectful person. So, yeah, it doesn't translate across cultures and a lot of other things as well.
Subject areas where this doesn't work well yet.
I really like what you mentioned about curated content, and we live in a world that has so much information. And as you mentioned, the quality of information is quite often, it's not curated and it's not filtered, and we are overwhelmed every day. You probably a lot of people in the audience can relate to that. How many tabs do you have open every day? How many articles do you have saved on LinkedIn? I have hundreds and hundreds every day. Maybe not every day, but every week, that's for sure. So are there any trends, or are there any solutions that you have seen so far going into curating content and filtering content and managing the quality?
A lot of people are actually working on curation solutions, but again, we have not seen a very good way to curate for quality. If you're scanning through YouTube, we're still at the point in time, for example, where an individual who understands their personal goals is better suited at saying whether this is helpful or not. And on the other side of things, self-directed learning and knowing how to find things is also a very important skill in life that we need for our lifelong learners. And equipping people with the capability to discern good resources from bad ones, to knowing what is peer-reviewed, to checking the sources. I mean, we have this entire fake news discussion. This is an important skill, and to a certain extent, the curation solutions take this discussion away. And unless we're able to make sure that our curated solutions are very well quality assured, so that the individual doesn't need to worry about these topics at all, they create like a blanket of reassurance that is a little bit deceiving.
So we definitely don't need more content. We just need better content, or filtered content.
And content is good or bad in relation to what you're trying to learn. So it's not as simple as saying this is a bad video and this is a bad article. It's what are we trying to get out of it?
Or what kind of our learning style is, because for some people, it's better to watch a video to understand a particular situation. For others, it's better to solve something or to, read an article about it. So, based on your learning style and based on your prerequisites, so to say, prerequisite learning. Very, very interesting. I wish, hope if anybody from our audience working on the solutions, please let me know. I'll fully support you because I need this in my life. So a company I know is offering free coaching to all employees. What's your opinion in this L&D initiative? Is it enough? Is it better than the traditional way?
Free coaching to all employees. I guess part of the question is who does the coaching? And if there's any compromises on quality from the free side. But of course, this is a wonderful approach. Most of the information people need is actually out there, and not so much of it is behind a paywall. And sometimes it's enough to motivate people and give them the support to get over their insecurities and have the courage that they have the ability to get the skills that they need. And this is extremely helpful. I do very much like that approach, I have to say. But of course, it should be coupled with access to training and resources for the people who need it, and not be an exclusive way of doing things.
Yeah, for senior levels or something. But yeah, I think the company that I worked with before Contest, it's fintech in Berlin. They had a coach coming every week, and you could book an hour, or just not necessarily an hour. You could book a slot, and whichever topic you believe it's relevant to you now. And it worked beautifully in the company. It was really, really appreciated. I think the company has grown quite a lot since then, so I'm not sure whether one day is enough, or whether you hire a couple of other coaches. But from my experience, and I did use it as well, it was worked wonderfully. It's not only that you need a bit of direction and a person who actually knows the other employees and can maybe understand the insights of the company and maybe direct you a little bit in a specific, rather than just an external coach who doesn't know the situation. Quite interesting. I find this initiative very, very nice.
I mean, even facilitating self-reflection is such a big step, because like many people have the discipline to write in the journals on the Friday evening what they learned and how they handled situations, but others very much benefit from that dedicated time and somebody to actually listen and guide them through that thinking process.
We have a question. It seems that the measurement of the success of corporate learning is quite tricky. Oh, yes, it is. Have you heard of any attempts in this regard?
Uh, there's a lot of initiatives around standardization of skills. People are trying to build unified measures. So across Europe, for example, we understand what skills are needed for certain professions, and these can be measured, but we're very far away from this. And as you can imagine, every company is different, and two people with the same job title are probably doing very different things. So we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I guess for tech, it's a lot easier than, as you mentioned before, about soft skills, about, feedback,
Exactly.
emotional intelligence, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
How can you rate the, productivity on a level of 1 to 10? What's your productivity level?
Yeah.
Do you need to go from 7 till 9 or from 3 to 5? Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really interesting models for doing this, but they are quite complex, and the people applying them need to be heavily trained and discern this and to be able to do it in a systematic way. Two people will have very different ratings at the end of the day on the same situation.
Interesting. And I guess it will relate quite a bit to our next question, which is AI and VR possible means for training soft skills. What do you think about that?
VR has been, and AR has been, an interesting area. It actually did not grow as much as it was expected to grow, and it's still not projected to be very big. Like, it's education and training, even though it's such a strong use case, is actually a very, very small percentage of the usage coming up. And it's still relatively expensive to develop. So we have quite a few problems here, but this is also a supply and demand question. So as soon as we've trained many more developers and designers who are able to work with these technologies, we will actually progress a bit.
Quite interesting. I met one company in Berlin, actually. They do VR. Yeah, I think they do VR, and more for factories and to train employees to use particular equipment. So I find it quite interesting. It might work for more for automation, machinery, and so on and so forth. And one company I met in Silicon Valley, and I found it quite fascinating in the way that it was AI. I can't remember what it was exactly, but anyway, so basically they taught soft skills in a way that you need to give very harsh feedback to your employee as a manager, or you need to fire an employee, and you played out to a person who is sitting next to you, and then this fragment, it's played back to you how the person sees you from their angle, from their perspective. I find it quite interesting to for people to reflect on their tone of voice, their intonation, their body language, eye contact, and to be able to see, okay, that's how I'm projected to another person. I find it quite interesting.
No, that's quite fascinating, and it's a very good use case. Most solutions don't really take full advantage of the VR context. And you could find ways to replicate them or even do it more effectively without the virtual reality side of things. But it will definitely be very interesting in formats like this. And also there's interesting applications where they're connected to actual physical devices. Which, for example, we have quite a bit in medicine, that you have puppets on which you can practice resuscitation while seeing the environment, the machinery, the equipment that you're working with. And these are the perfect use cases where these immersive technologies make perfect sense and they provide the best experience.
I went to one conference last year, and it was like VR via met via, and I basically went through the veins. I went through the heart. I was walking around the room. Ooh, I'm in a heart. Ooh, some lungs. Ooh, that look nice. The person's not smoking. You know, it's quite interesting. So just to get the whole experience of, you know, going through the veins, going through all this pipes of your body. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anatomy has been completely changed by this. We went from textbooks to actually dissecting every single organ in any way and zooming in and out of a heart to understand how it functions. So this has been completely amazing. I think our medical students are not as awed by it as they should be, but it's quite some progress.
Yeah, for anatomy, for sure. Like
Yeah.
if you can go inside and like have a look at everything before you actually, you know, cut someone, or so you have a less of a shock.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting, very interesting.
What's also kind of interesting and what I'm really eager to see how this evolves is simulation-based learning, whether it is in VR or just simple applications for quick decisions under pressure. And this is something that is very difficult to train and to teach in other formats in ways that is measurable or at scale. And this is quite interesting.
Yeah, so there's a question just after your, oh no, it was sent a little bit earlier, but would you mind elaborating on the AI learnings a little bit more? Is that more relating to adaptive or customized learning path, excuse me?
I wonder if we answered this already. There's quite a few application areas for AI. Today, we mostly covered the ones related to personalization, but of course, there's a lot of other applications happening in the background that also go in reducing administrative tasks in learning, which is a super use case that everybody's happy about. And other background technologies that make the life of teachers and instructors much easier.
Cool, thank you. With this move toward digitalization of learning, how do we keep the important piece of human connection, especially in schools, universities?
This is a good one. And as we've been working in academic education for a long, well, not a long time, but in online education for a long time, it's something that always comes up. And something that I'm surprised that it comes up, because we've actually managed to create social relationships and human relationships that are extremely strong in a digital space. And if you remove a lot of the frontal lectures and things that are repetitive that students can do by themselves in their own time, what remains is actually the opportunity to work together. And you can build strong peer groups. You can use a lot of team-based learning to actually facilitate this and have the students make connections to themselves, but also to their instructors, because when we're like this face-to-face, it's better that we have a conversation rather than, let's say, me delivering a lecture, which you can watch whenever you want to watch. So if you put the focus of this time on the connection, you're actually winning a lot more.
Very interesting. And I find it beautiful, like using like mural, for example, and then especially in the way that like I teach at several universities in Berlin, and all our lectures have to be moved online, obviously. And some of the students that I've had before who are very, very shy, like very introverted, we're not comfortable, you know, speaking up, now they're the most active people on mural and all this online discussions, because I think we live in such a world that promotes in the Western society, you have to be extrovert, you have to be active, you have to really speak up. So I think a lot of introverts really enjoy that in a way of having a bit of a cocoon any safe space in your digital space, at the same time being able to speak up and having, yeah, little of a bubble of safety, so to say. Just a theory.
No, and it's a good one. I mean, the dynamic of speaking up in a largish classroom, it's something that we've been programmed to fear.
Yeah.
And this is quite removed in these type of spaces.
Yeah. I read somewhere that it's normal that a lot of people are afraid. I think in there was a study like in US, there are more people are afraid of public speaking than of death.
Yeah.
So fair
Which
enough.
means if you have to give the eulogy at a funeral, you're better off being the one in the casket.
Yeah, I never understood this American way of doing this. It's just, yeah, anyway. So, and then there was a comparison of the reason why we're so afraid is that in the times where we were running around and try hunting animals, if we are surrounded, if all eyes are on us, it means we are surrounded by animals, and our brain thinks that it's danger. And I'm panicking. You know, obviously, I'm not going to be standing up like a public speaking and be confident. I'm going to be crippling and being scared of that because I'm going to be attacked. It's quite an interesting theory. I thought it could be true.
Definitely true. It will be interesting whether in 10 years from now we actually have to start compensating and actively train people to be comfortable in social settings.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point.
Toastmasters will
flourish
that will
even
be an
more.
Edtech trend.
Yeah, Toastmasters continue doing their meetings. They the once in 2 weeks, all online. I actually attended a couple of them. Very interesting.
Okay.
And speaking publicly online is so much more different. It's I don't like it to be honest. No, not a fan. I have never watched any of the videos of the interviews that I made or interviewed someone. Yeah, we have a couple of more questions. Where in the world are the most interesting happening around EdTech? I probably know the answer to this question.
Oh, yeah. So very interesting emerging markets, primarily around Asia and Africa. This
Okay.
is driven also by population growth. So as the population is growing, they really need more education solutions out there, but also in terms of the interest and openness to innovation. More openness to innovation in China than in Africa, but Africa, you know, sometimes the system can skip certain levels of development and jump directly to the next one. So this will be interesting.
That's very interesting. It's like learning and the whole education system has changed after the war because suddenly everybody has to be upskilled and everybody has to adapt to the new world. So I guess after pandemic, it's also going to be the same thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're living in very interesting times, I have to say. Not the times that you probably won't enjoy to live in because you never know what's coming, but definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's happening whether we like it or not.
Yeah. Okay, it's the question quite related to what we talked about before, but let's just ask it anyway. How do you make the success in building strong relationship through digital environment? What was the key?
The key is definitely engineering these relationships. So it is extremely important that you mindfully look at these in the design of your online courses and the design of your edtech products, and that you ideally engineer opportunities for these to happen. So for us, project-based, problem-based learning is really great because it gives a group of people a goal to work on together. And through this experience, they will actually build really strong bonds. They will likely have a very hard time in the beginning. They will argue, but they will overcome it at least 90% of the time. And this brings them in a much better place soon
Very
enough.
interesting. And I think sometimes conflict, it's very positive thing, right? Because you get to know yourself better, get to know your colleagues better, and then you're challenged. All your perceptions are twisted and turned upside down, and you find new solutions as well.
Yeah, definitely. What also sometimes works actually is finding ways to surface people's interests with public profiles or other ways of actually showcasing this so that they actually have common ground on which to connect. So this is also something I would recommend you look into.
Something beyond just work, but it's me as a person as well that likes to, watch this Netflix TV series, whatever it is.
Exactly. I mean, if people are in the same room, they can notice they're wearing the same sneakers, and somehow we need to make this happen in digital as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't really be able to see the sneakers in a digital world.
but yeah, I guess there's Instagram accounts that can take care of that.
Fair enough. I know one university that in order to connect students more, they created the Instagram channel where everybody has access to, and all students share stories of what they did today and how so they feel connected, and they feel like all the classmates doing random stuff, and they feel like they're a bit closer to each other, or sending each other voice messages in a chat, or what they cooked today, what they ate today. Yeah.
Have you seen any other initiatives for keeping people connected during these times?
Yeah, a lot of things when it comes to gaming, lots of different games, quizzes, dances, different raves, parties, karaoke even, dancing. Yeah, dancing more like with a teacher. You actually have a teacher and the whole group, repeats the moves, learning a salsa after all these years. What else? Lots of games, different challenges, like draw your neighbor, practice your skills, cooking together. Even a friend of mine was organizing corporate cooking. So it's actually, you deliver different ingredients to your door, and you cook together with a facilitator, which is very, very cool. Or even, having coffee together and having this breakout room chats, randomized, where you might end up talking to a person that in the company, but you don't really know. And then you have maybe if you don't really know what to talk about, you have different questions you can ask each other that are already given to you. So just to connect, get to know each other a little bit better.
That's nice. I think there was a Slack app for that.
Yeah, I think there is one that Polly. Was it Polly?
Yeah.
No, it's more for polling. I think Factory organized one of them with Icebreaker.
Yeah,
it was quite interesting. Yeah. No, lots of different things that it's up to all your imagination. I mean, you can do whatever you want with your colleagues if you have a bit of creativity. And I know lots of people doing yoga together, meditation, virtual drinking, guilty. Especially when you can change the background to a bar, and then after a couple of glasses or whatever, you don't even realize you're not in the same room.
Oh, definitely. We're definitely learning a lot during this period that we can apply to online education.
And people are probably a lot more receptive, if they already been in this and they already see it as we can do it. Yeah. Very interesting. And it's probably also related to more, as you mentioned before, remote work. A lot of companies realize, like, well, we can save so much money on offices and furniture and so on and so forth. So do you believe in the future that we are moving away from employing people in a company rather than a gig economy and specialized freelancers?
And this was a trend before as well. And it may be accelerated. I don't know whether it will be accelerated so much by the shift to remote work as it is due to the incentives of saving money, unfortunately, but it will probably continue evolving. It will be interesting though in how companies adapt, because switching to remote working in the short term does work, but it can also be overwhelming. So in a few months from now, the question will be, did they maintain their usual operations? Probably, and they probably did it quite well in very many cases, but are they innovating? Are they progressing beyond this? Uh, these are different things that people will need to be trained for, and they will need new constructive working modes for in a completely different setting.
I agree. I mean, to me, I really see this remote work. It's a bit of everybody benefits except for actual employees, in my opinion, because suddenly you have to. There's a lot of question happening around mental health because you don't really switch off, and it's a bit of a privilege for some people. If you live in a big house with extra room and you have a partner that's, freelancers or whatever that can look after kids, you're okay. But if you have kids and if you have a very cramped apartment, how can you be productive? How can you actually switch off? Where you work, where you eat, where you sleep. And I know a lot of people who actually experience that when they reach the point of almost reaching a burnout, because you wake up in the morning, you are still in your pajamas, you look at your computer, you check your computer, you start working, you have your breakfast while you work, and emails come through, and you have your lunch, and you're still in this work mode. You don't really switch off. And then it's evening and you kind of cook, but there's some emails coming through, and you're always in this work mode. So it's very, very dangerous. I really believe that's kind of a trick show. Yeah, remote work good for everyone. I don't think it's good. I really think that it could be quite dangerous. And all those perks for companies promote of lunch, community engagement, entertainment room, even footy as a good Berlin startup should possibly have. You don't have it anymore. And sure, if you live in a nice place, if you have nice apartment with a garden or like a garden or whatever, not sure, you can switch off a little bit. But I think it's a little bit very, very dangerous way to say, yeah, remote work, now we can work from home. Not everyone can switch off, and companies take advantage of that.
Exactly. And the companies that are extremely good at remote working and have been set up like this, they do invest in creating expectations for their people, setting working hours, creating quiet time, training, home office equipment. I mean, myself and half my team started having issues with our wrists when we switched to the home office, because suddenly we don't have the fancy chairs that make sure that you're in a good posture.
And I know also in Germany there is a law, if your employees work from home, you're supposed to provide them with the right environment. I'm surprised no one has sued any companies yet, because it's in whatever it's called, anyway, like an Arbeits, whatever. So you're supposed to provide your employees with the right desk and the right chair, but it's not really happening. So,
Well, I think everyone wants to keep their jobs right now, and suing your employer is not top of mind.
Probably.
But yeah, if this continues, it will probably come, and these things need to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I know lots of people who also on Kurzarbeit, and they say, well, we're on Kurzarbeit, but we work full time. I think I've been tricked. And we have a personal question. It's a more personal question to you both. Where does your passion of desire to improve education and learning come from? You can start.
Well, it's always been very intrinsic. Oh, it's late. I can't pronounce big words anymore. Well, I'm still young. I would love to have an amazing origin story that is about the moment I figured out it's where I want to be and what I want to do. But I've been gravitating towards this my entire life, and it's something that I find extremely exciting. And As a proper millennial, I want my life to have meaning, and I don't think I'm here just to be happy and earn money and have great parties all the time. And this is work that I find extremely meaningful and extremely challenging at the same time. How about you, Ola?
Ooh, now I'm being interviewed. Exciting.
Yeah.
I think to me, it started when I realized that there is something I can teach others. And then it was like a aha moment. It's like, wow, I can change someone's mind. I can make someone's life better. And it's not even that difficult for me for particular topics. And I found, okay, why don't I, well, that's how I started training in intercultural and diversity inclusion topics, and realized that I can make people's life a little bit better when it comes to behavior, when it comes to understanding themselves, understanding others, adapting to situations. So for me, it was more like, how can I make this world a little bit better when it comes to communication, when it comes to learning? And the other thing, one of the reasons why I started Berlin, it's I really believe in communities of praxis. I really believe in events like this, even though it's not in the typical event we had at Berlin. But by the audience asking amazing questions, we are having conversation like this, I'm learning so much at the moment. The audience is learning so much, and having these masterminds, and we are much better at learning together. We are injecting so much knowledge into each other than if I would just watch a video and stay at home. So this kind of a community of practice, community of learning, when we not only share information with one person, two people, three people, but with a big group of people, and we push each other further. You are as good as the weakest link in your team. So the more information you spread, the more information you generate, the better off it's for everyone. So I think that's where the learning should go. Learning should be accessible, learning should be free and filtered.
Absolutely. And I think this community is amazing, especially in Berlin, for all the people working in these areas and not getting stuck in the echo chambers of their own companies and own didactic concepts and so forth. I really felt this 2 years ago, that my thinking was so limited to our own approaches to education that I was detrimental. And 2 years ago, we were really missing education-related events.
Yes, Berlin. We have another question. If I want to learn about edtech, who should I follow on LinkedIn or other useful resources? I can send a follow-up email about that, because I recently posted on Berlin, LinkedIn, who should you follow, the most important people you should follow in learning and development around the world. So whoever asked this question could go to LinkedIn, and I think it's like one of the fifth posts down. At the same time, any other resources would you recommend, Alexandra?
I think there's a lot of US-centric ones that tell you a lot. EdSearch, for example, it gives you quite an overview. An interesting source for Europe actually is Emerge Education.
Mm-hmm.
They're a fund based in London, but I think they're actually one of the biggest education funds in Europe, and they connect everybody. So they write very good analyses if you want actually to have someone's perspective who has looked at the entire area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And another thing I think the audience could be interesting to know that thanks to Alexandra, we have a very, very interesting resource on our website, berlin.com. If you go to resources, it goes to Edtech Investors. So there is a whole list of Edtech investors around the world and what kind of companies they invested in. So I will urge you to go check it out. It's free, it's accessible for everyone. So if you're looking for investors, maybe that would be a good point to start, to actually look where this company is, who they invested in, and where they're based. So thank you so much for creating this resource. Super useful for everyone. Yeah, if you don't have any more questions, I would say what will be the kind of key takeaways, key things that the audience should leave this meeting with, this webinar with, in terms of what they should do if they're thinking of entering edtech, or maybe pivoting, or launching? What would things they need to take into consideration?
Well, welcome to EdTech. It's a difficult market. It's extremely interesting at the moment. But yeah, look at it in the long term. It's definitely not a short-term gain. Look at learning outcomes and remember the moral imperative that if you work in education, you do have a responsibility to the learner, and that is something to safeguard and something to treasure, because they are in a little bit of a vulnerable position by putting themselves in that situation. They're going outside of their comfort zone, and that is something to be respected as an edtech solution provider, be it in terms of safety of data, quality of content, and in delivering on what you're actually promising on. And if you do that and do it mindfully, you will be very well differentiated and successful in the industry.
And thank you very, very much. I think it was a very, very fruitful discussion. I think we've done a great job. So thank you very much once again to Alexandra and to the audience. Please join Berlin. Please donate to us if you find our content useful. It's a nonprofit organization, and connect with us. We are free to connect. We are free to us to answer any of your questions. We'll send around for for mine and Alexandra's LinkedIn profile. So once again, have a great evening. It's nice that you joined us from all over the world. And yeah, I hope to see you soon, Alexandra. Take you out for a drink
very
sometime.
soon.
And yeah, so thank you, the audience. Have a nice evening.
Thank you for tuning in, guys. And thank you for your questions.